I discovered that betrayal doesn't always announce itself with shouting and chaos. It can arrive with a smile, wrapped in reasonable words. My blood ran cold as I stared at evidence that shouldn't exist. My name is Mark Stewart, and I'm 35 years old. Each morning, I still open my auto shop at 6. Grease under my fingernails before most people finish their coffee. My wife, Mariz Stewart, sold my father's cabin while I was away, the Cedar Refuge on Whitlow Lake, where my daughter, Mandy Stewart, learned to fish just like I once did with Dad. When confronted, Mariz didn't break or confess. She looked me in the eye and calmly suggested I was confused. My stomach twisted as she rewrote reality. I won't let her lies become my truth. This isn't about anger. It's about justice. Evidence doesn't lie, even when people do. Before I go any further, let me know in the comments where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow I will share a story you don't want to miss. But let me start from the beginning. The rain started as a whisper against my windshield, then built into a steady drumbeat as I drove home from the airport. Each mile marker brought me closer to a truth I wasn't ready to face. $20,000. Property sale deposit. The words pulsed in my head with every swipe of the wipers. I checked the account 3 times before printing the statement at an airport kiosk. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the bank had entered someone else's deposit into our account. Maybe. But my gut knew better. My headlights cut yellow paths through the gathering darkness as I turned onto our street. The houses looked the same as when I'd left 3 days ago. Porch lights glowing against the storm. Garbage cans lined up for tomorrow's collection. Everything normal, except nothing was. I pulled into our driveway, killed the engine, and sat there. Rain hammered against the roof of my truck. I thought about the cabin. Cedar walls my father had stained himself. The uneven floorboards that creaked under your weight. The smell of pine and lake water that hit you the moment you opened the door. Dad spent 15 years building that place, board by board. Now it was the only piece of him I had left. I grabbed my duffel and the folded bank statement from the passenger seat and made a dash for the front door. Inside, the house was quiet, except for the soft clinking of a spoon against ceramic. I found Mariz in the kitchen, perched on a stool at the island. Her auburn hair was pulled into a loose bun, and she wore the gray cardigan she saved for comfortable evenings. A cup of tea steamed beside her, phone placed face down on the counter. "You're home early," she said, looking up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I thought your flight was delayed. Caught an earlier connection." I set my bag down and placed the printed bank statement on the counter between us. Water droplets from my rain-soaked jacket spattered across the paper. "Want to tell me about this?" She glanced at it, her expression neutral. "About what?" $20,000 deposited yesterday. Memo says, property sale. Mariz frowned, picking up the paper. "That's weird. Must be some kind of bank error." She set it down and took a sip of her tea. "You know how they mix things up sometimes." "Mariz," I said carefully, "it's the exact price we discussed for the cabin last year when you wanted to sell it." "The cabin," I said, "I would never sell." "Oh, that." She waved her hand dismissively. "Maybe someone made an offer and they put a deposit in the wrong account? You should call the bank tomorrow." I studied her face, searching for a tell. "The cabin's in my name. Nobody can accept offers, but me." "Well, I don't know then." Her tone sharpened slightly. "You're acting like I did something wrong when clearly it's just a mix-up. Did you sell my father's cabin?" She laughed softly, setting her cup down with a deliberate clink. "Mark, honey, you know how you get sometimes. You forget things when you're focused on work. Remember last year when you couldn't find the insurance papers you'd filed yourself?" My chest tightened. This isn't about misplaced paperwork. This is about my father's property that I never agreed to sell. "Our property," she corrected, her smile thinning. And honestly, you're overreacting. It's just an old cabin we barely use. You're always so nostalgic about things. I take Mandy there every summer. For what? 2 weekends? While I deal with the taxes and maintenance costs? She slid off the stool and carried her cup to the sink. You need to calm down. I noticed the kitchen trash can, then, the lid slightly ajar, a corner of letterhead visible among the coffee grounds and vegetable peels. I pulled it out while Maraz's back was turned. A half-shredded letter from Lakeshore Title Company. The room seemed to tilt sideways. There it was, the company's logo still intact, along with fragments of words, transaction completed, and thank you for your business. When I looked up, Maurice was watching me, her face suddenly still as stone. She'd seen what I found. You did something you can't talk your way out of, I said quietly. Thunder cracked outside, shaking the windows as we stood frozen in the kitchen. Truth finally laid bare between us. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shredded paper in the trash can, Marise's face when she realized I'd found it. Around 4 in the morning, I gave up on sleep altogether. The house was silent as I crept downstairs to the kitchen. The trash can sat exactly where I'd left it. I pulled on a pair of disposable gloves from under the sink, habit from years of handling engine grease and chemicals at the shop, and carefully fished out every scrap of the letter I could find. Some pieces were stained with coffee grounds, others torn so small they looked like confetti. I gathered them all into a plastic bag. In the garage, I flipped on the lights over my workbench. The fluorescence hummed to life, illuminating the organized chaos of tools and parts that had always been my sanctuary. Dad taught me to work with my hands in a space just like this one. A man needs a place where problems can be solved, he used to say. I spread the fragments across the workbench and began the painstaking process of reassembling them like a jigsaw puzzle. It took nearly an hour, but a picture started emerging. I secured the pieces with transparent tape, revealing partial sentences. Transaction completed for the property located at, and then the fragments showed Whitlow Lake, followed by what looked like the beginning of our cabin's address. At the bottom, the date, 5 days ago, while I was in Chicago. My stomach knotted. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. By 7:30, I was dressed and in my truck, driving toward the county offices. The rain had cleared overnight, leaving a crisp morning that would have been beautiful any other day. I parked in front of the title office just as the lights came on inside. Elaine Weller was unlocking the door when I approached. She'd been the county clerk since before I got my driver's license, a fixture in Mason County, with her gray, streaked hair always pulled into a neat bun, and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. "Mark Stewart?" She smiled, clearly surprised. "You're out early. What brings you to my neck of the woods?" "Morning, Elaine. I need to check a property record." She ushered me in, flipping on more lights. "Come on back. Let me get my computer booted up." I waited while she settled behind her desk, surrounded by neatly stacked folders and reference books. "What property are we looking for?" "The cabin on Whitlow Lake. Should be under my name, Mark Stewart." Her fingers clacked efficiently across the keyboard. "Let's see. Yes, here it is. Stewart property, lakefront on Whitlow." She paused, squinting at the screen. "Oh, but there's been a change. Looks like a sale was recorded. Just last week, actually." My breath caught. "Can you print that record for me?" "Of course." The printer hummed to life, and Elaine retrieved the page, handing it to me with a concerned look. "Everything all right, Mark?" I stared down at the page. There it was in black and white. A warranty deed transferring my father's cabin to someone named Tyler Fenn. And there, at the bottom, my signature. Except, it wasn't mine. The curves were wrong, the final loop too pronounced. "This isn't my signature," I said quietly. Elaine leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. "Are you sure? Because that would be fraud." I finished her sentence. Yes, I'm sure. I was out of state when this was supposedly signed. Her expression shifted from concern to alarm. Let me pull the complete file. She clicked through several screens, then printed a stack of documents. Here's everything we have: the deed, transfer tax statement, and seller's affidavit. I flipped through the pages, each one bearing the same forged signature. I need copies of all of this. Of course, Elaine said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Mark, if what you're saying is true, you should talk to the sheriff. And a lawyer. I will, I promised, tucking the copies into my jacket. Thank you, Elaine. That afternoon, I laid the documents out on the dining room table, just as Maris walked in from her shift at the medical billing office. What's all this? She asked, setting down her purse. Property records from the title office, I said evenly. Someone sold my cabin 5 days ago. I slid the warranty deed toward her. That's not my signature. She barely glanced at it. There must be some kind of mistake. Maybe someone at the office made an error. That's quite an error, transferring a property I own to a complete stranger while I'm out of town. Well, I don't know what to tell you. She stepped back, arms crossing defensively. These things happen. File a complaint with the county. Mares, I said, keeping my voice level. The only people who had access to my personal information were you and me. I didn't sign this. Her eyes flashed. What exactly are you accusing me of, Mark? Because it sounds like you think I forged documents or something crazy. Did you? This is ridiculous. She threw up her hands. You've been acting paranoid since you got home. First the bank deposit, now this? Maybe you should talk to someone about your trust issues. I'm asking a simple question. And I'm not dignifying it with an answer. She snatched her purse back up and stormed toward our bedroom, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the pictures on the wall. I sat alone at the table, staring at the documents that proved everything I owned. Everything my father had built had been stolen right out from under me. My phone buzzed with an email notification. The County Permits Department, construction permit filed, Whitlow Lake property. I opened it to find that someone named Tyler Fenn had applied for extensive renovation permissions at my cabin's address. I opened my laptop and pulled up the real estate listings for Whitlow Lake. There it was, my cabin, the old photo showing the weathered cedar siding and the dock stretching into the water. Across the image, a red banner read, "Sold." So it's already started, I whispered, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The next morning, I called into the shop and told my lead mechanic I needed another day. Some things couldn't wait, and this was one of them. I drove downtown to the small brick building where Josefina Valdez kept her law practice. I'd known her since high school. She was 2 years ahead of me, always the smartest person in any room. When she came back after law school to set up her own practice, she'd helped me with the paperwork after Dad died. Her assistant showed me right in. Josefina stood behind her desk, already organizing papers into a file. News travels fast in small towns. Mark, she nodded, gesturing to the chair. Elaine from the title office called me. Said you might be stopping by. I pulled the documents from my messenger bag. Someone sold my cabin, and it wasn't me. Josefina's eyes narrowed as she took the papers, spreading them across her desk with methodical precision. Her fingers traced the signature at the bottom of the deed. This isn't your handwriting, she stated flatly. It wasn't a question. No. I was in Chicago when this was supposedly signed and notarized. She picked up the notary page, examining the stamp and seal. Shannon Prescott. I know her. This isn't her normal signature either. And her stamp looks different. She reached for her phone, dialed quickly. Shannon? Josefina Valdez. Quick question. Did you notarize a property transfer for Mark Stewart last Thursday? She listened, then thanked her and hung up. Shannon was at her sister's wedding in Denver last Thursday. She didn't notarize anything for anyone. Josefina's face hardened. This is fraud, Mark. Forgery. We need to file a lis pendens immediately to block any further transfers. A what? Lis pendens. Notice of pending litigation. It clouds the title, so this Tyler Fenn can't sell or refinance the property until we sort this out. She pulled out a legal pad. We need to document everything. Who had access to your papers? When did you first notice the bank deposit? Any previous conversations about selling the property? For 3 hours, we pieced it all together. The forged notarization, the questionable witness signatures, the suspiciously low sale price. Josefina worked with cold precision, her questions direct and unsparing. By afternoon, she had drafted both the lease pendants and a fraud complaint. I'll file these first thing tomorrow, she said, sliding them into a folder. In the meantime, don't move any money around, don't confront this Tyler Fenn yet, and document any conversations with Maryse. Speaking of which, she fixed me with a penetrating look. You know what this means, right? I nodded slowly. That she sold my father's cabin behind my back and committed several felonies in the process. Josefina's voice was gentle but firm. Mark, this isn't just about the cabin anymore. I remember Dad sitting on that cabin porch, teaching me how to bait a hook, showing me how to replace rotted boards. I could still smell the pine sap on my hands. I know, I said finally. That evening, I walked into the kitchen where Maris was loading the dishwasher after dinner. She wore a calm, icy smile, like nothing was wrong, like our life wasn't cracking beneath our feet. We need to talk, I said, setting my folder on the counter. About? Her voice was light, dismissive. I slid the forged deed across the counter. This signature, it's not mine. She barely glanced at it. Digital signatures always look strange. You probably signed it electronically and forgot. I was in Chicago when this was signed, Maris. Then maybe you authorized me verbally. She closed the dishwasher, pressed start. You said the cabin was just sitting there, costing us money. I never said that, and I never authorized anyone to sell it. She sighed dramatically. Mark, I think you're confused. You've been working so hard lately, it's understandable you'd forget things. The gaslighting was relentless, a perfect wall of denial designed to make me question my own reality. But I knew what I had and hadn't done. I knew what my own handwriting looked like. You know, I said, keeping my voice steady, there's a word for what you're doing right now. Oh? She raised an eyebrow. Gaslighting, making me question my own sanity and memory. Such a dramatic term, she scoffed. I'm just trying to help you remember correctly. You're going to wish I didn't know what that word means. I gathered the papers back into the folder. She laughed dismissively. God, Mark, you're being so dramatic. It's just an old cabin your father left you. It's not like it was doing anything but gathering dust. I didn't respond. There was no point. The truth would speak for itself soon enough. Late that night, after Maryse had gone to bed, I sat at my computer in the darkened living room. Outside, rain lashed against the windows as thunder rolled across the hills. I typed a simple email to Josefina. I've confirmed what we suspected. Please file everything first thing tomorrow. Just as I hit send, lightning flashed across the window, illuminating my reflection in the glass. In that brief electric moment, I hardly recognized myself. 2 mornings later, I drove out to Whitlow Lake with the court papers folded in my jacket pocket. It was early, the kind of morning Dad always said was best for thinking. The sun rose sharp and gold over the water, cutting through pine branches as I pulled into the gravel drive. My stomach dropped when I saw what they'd done. The cabin stood like a wounded animal, its front porch half dismantled, wooden boards stacked in haphazard piles. A blue dumpster sat in the yard, already filled with what looked like interior walls and fixtures. I sat in my truck for a minute, just breathing. This was the place where Dad taught me to fish, where we'd spent countless weekends fixing loose boards and telling stories, where he'd shown me how a man fixes his mistakes instead of hiding them. Now it was being gutted, like it meant nothing. I got out, phone in hand, and started taking pictures. The documentation would matter later, Josefina had said. Evidence of everything. That's when I saw him, Tyler Fenn, standing on what remained of the front steps, clipboard in hand, talking to a guy in a hard hat. He looked exactly like the type who'd buy a property through forged documents, slick hair, expensive boots that had never seen real work, a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Can I help you?" he called out, watching me approach. "Mark Stewart," I said, extending my hand. "The property owner." His smile twitched, but held. He ignored my outstretched hand. "Former owner, you mean? Tyler Fenn. This is my place now. That's actually why I'm here." I kept my voice even. "There's a court order freezing all work on the property until ownership is resolved." "Yeah, my lawyer mentioned something about that." He shrugged. "Some last-minute tantrum about the sale. Nothing that concerns me." "It should." I pulled out the preliminary injunction Josefina had obtained yesterday. "The court disagrees." He glanced at the paper without taking it, then made a dismissive gesture. "Look, buddy, I bought this place fair and square. Got the deed right here." He patted his pocket. "Your wife signed off. It's done. My forged signature is what's done." I stepped closer. "And the courts put everything on hold until we sort it out." Tyler's smile hardened into something uglier. "You know how these things work, Stewart. By the time your little lawsuit gets heard, I'll have sold to someone else. Flipped the property 3 times. Good luck tracking that paper trail." The calm I'd been holding on to wavered. I thought about Dad's toolbox that should still be under the workbench, the carved initials on the back porch post, the memories embedded in every wall. "I'm going inside to document what you've done," I said, moving toward the door. Tyler stepped in front of me. "Private property. Court order." I held up the paper again. "I have the right to inspect." He stared me down for a long moment, then stepped aside with exaggerated politeness. "Be my guest. Not much left that's worth saving anyway." Inside was worse. They'd already torn out the knotty pine paneling Dad had installed himself, stripped the kitchen cabinets, pulled up half the floorboards. I walked through slowly, recording video on my phone, narrating each room and the damage. In the back bedroom, I found Dad's old fishing tackle box kicked under a pile of debris. I pocketed it quietly. When I came back outside, Tyler was on his phone, pacing. "Just so we're clear," I said, "this order means no more work until the hearing. Not a nail, not a board." He pocketed his phone, that smirk returning. "We'll see about that. Money talks in this county, Stewart." "So does fraud," I replied. "Maybe ask Mariz how that worked." His eyes narrowed. "Your wife knew what she was doing. Don't blame me because your marriage is falling apart." I didn't rise to the bait. I just held up my phone. "Got everything I need. Expect service of the restraining order by end of day." As I walked back to my truck, he called after me. "You're wasting your time. I'll sell around whatever you file." I didn't look back. By afternoon, I was in Josefina's office, uploading the videos and photos to her computer. "This is perfect," she said, scrolling through. "Clear evidence he's ignoring the preliminary order. I'm filing for an emergency TRO right now." "TRO?" "Temporary restraining order. It's stronger, with specific penalties if violated." She was already typing. "Judge Campbell has emergency hours until 6. We can get this signed today." True to her word, by 7 that evening, Josefina texted me. "TRO granted. Sheriff serving papers to Fenn now. No more construction." I felt a weight lift. It wasn't victory, but it was a stay of execution for what remained of the cabin. When I got home, the house was dark except for a single lamp in the living room. Mariz sat in the armchair, wine glass dangling from her fingers. She looked up as I closed the door. "Had a productive day?" Her voice was ice smooth. I hung my jacket on the hook. "Productive enough." "Tyler called," she said. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "By insisting on the truth?" "By dragging everyone through court." She took a sip of wine. I told you this would get messy if you kept pushing. I looked at her, really looked, wondering how I'd missed this version of her all these years. Had it always been there, waiting? Messy's fine, I said, heading toward the stairs. I'm not the one covered in lies. 3 days crawled by like years. I hardly slept, spending nights reviewing documents with Josefina, gathering evidence and trying to maintain some normalcy for Mandy. Maurice and I circled each other in cold silence, sleeping in separate rooms. She'd started staying late at yoga, coming home with her hair still perfectly styled. The morning of the hearing arrived with a clarity that felt almost cruel. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, straightening my tie, the same one Dad had given me years ago. For important days, he'd said. This qualified. The courthouse loomed gray against the morning sky. Josefina met me on the steps, briefcase in hand, looking battle-ready in her charcoal suit. "Ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be." Inside, the courtroom smelled of old wood and anxiety. I spotted Mariz immediately, sitting beside her attorney, some slick-haired guy I'd never seen before. She wore a powder blue blouse that made her look softer, more vulnerable. I recognized the tactic, the first of many, I was sure. Tyler Fenn sat behind them, thumbing through his phone like this was just a minor inconvenience in his day. All rise. Judge Campbell entered, a no-nonsense woman with silver-rimmed glasses and reputation for cutting through bullshit. That, at least, gave me hope. Josefina presented our case first. Clean, methodical, devastating. The forged signature, the falsified power of attorney, the notary stamp from someone who hadn't practiced in years. Your Honor, she concluded, this was fraud from the first pen stroke. When Mariz took the stand, she transformed. Her voice trembled slightly, her eyes widened with earnest concern. I believed everything was in order, she said, hands folded neatly. Mark agreed verbally to the sale. He's always wanted to be free of that old place. The lie burned in my chest. Her attorney guided her through practiced answers. And did you forge your husband's signature? Absolutely not. Why would I? Mark often signs things and forgets. He's very scattered sometimes. I gripped the table edge until my knuckles whitened. Scattered? The man who rebuilt engines from memory? Who kept maintenance logs for 10 years? When Mariz's attorney finished, Josefina rose. Ms. Stewart, you claim my client. Agreed, verbally. When, exactly? Oh, several times. Last summer, especially. Can you provide any witnesses to these conversations? Well, no. They were private. I see. Josefina lifted a document. I have here an affidavit from Notary Public James Donnelly, whose stamp appears on the power of attorney document. Would you like to hear what he says? Mariz's face tightened almost imperceptibly. If the court thinks it's necessary, Josefina read clearly, the signature on this document is not mine. The notary seal is fraudulent. I have not practiced as a notary since my commission expired 2 years ago, and I have never met either party in this case. The courtroom fell silent. Even the usual shuffling of papers stopped. Furthermore, Josefina continued, Mr. Donnelly has filed a separate complaint with the State Fraud Division regarding the misuse of his expired credentials. Judge Campbell looked over her glasses at Mariz, whose perfect composure had finally cracked. Your Honor, Mariz's attorney jumped in, my client was not responsible for the notarization process. Then who was? The judge asked sharply. Silence. I watched Tyler shift uncomfortably in his seat. By afternoon, Judge Campbell's ruling was clear. A full injunction against any transfer or work on the property, funds to remain frozen, and a date set for the full hearing in 3 weeks. Outside, Mariz wouldn't look at me. She hurried away with her attorney, who was already talking about alternative approaches. I called Mrs. Garcia, our neighbor who was watching Mandy, and asked if I could pick her up early. Dad, Mandy exclaimed as she bounced into the car, can we get ice cream? Even better, I said. How about we go check on Grandpa's cabin? Her eyes lit up. Really? I thought the bad man had it. Not anymore. Not today. The drive to Whitlow Lake felt different this time. The court order in my glove compartment gave us permission to retrieve personal items. More importantly, it put the cabin back in limbo, neither mine nor theirs, but closer to the truth. When we arrived, the construction equipment was gone. Yellow tape marked the property line. It looks sad, Mandy said, taking my hand as we walked up to the porch. It's just waiting, I told her, for things to be set right. Inside, the destruction was still evident, but without workers swarming, it felt less violated somehow. Mandy explored carefully, stepping over debris, pointing out memories in each corner. Remember when you taught me to play chess here? And when Grandpa made us pancakes shaped like boats? In the kitchen, she crouched beside a broken counter. Dad, look! She pulled out a dusty red toolbox. Isn't this Grandpa's? I knelt beside her, throat tight. Dad's initials were still carved into the metal. J.S. It sure is, sweetheart. She ran her fingers over the rusted hinges. Can we fix it up? Maybe repaint it? Absolutely, I promised. We'll make it good as new. When we get the cabin back? When we get the cabin back. As evening approached, I locked up what was left of the doors. Standing on the porch, I made a silent promise to Dad. And to Mandy. This place would be ours again. Truth would win. The drive home started peacefully, Mandy falling asleep in the back seat clutching the toolbox. My phone rang through the car speakers. Josefina. Mark, we've just been served with a counter-motion. Tyler claims he sold the cabin again. To his cousin's company. I pulled to the roadside, gripping the wheel. What? How could he? The injunction. Says he completed the sale yesterday, before the hearing. I looked back at Mandy, still innocent in sleep, then ahead at the darkening road. They're not done yet, I whispered. The next morning dawned gray and misty. I hadn't slept much, my mind racing with each new twist in Morris's game. I pulled into the parking lot outside Josefina's law office 15 minutes early, thermos of coffee in hand. The smell reminded me of early mornings with Dad, planning our day at the cabin before the sun broke through the pines. Josefina was already at her desk, surrounded by stacks of paper and 3 open laptops. She didn't look up when I entered, just pointed to a chair. We've got him, she said, tapping her screen. Tyler's not as clever as he thinks. I leaned forward. What did you find? She turned one of the laptops toward me. This so-called holding company, Lakefront Acquisitions, LLC, was registered just 4 days ago. And look at the business address. The screen showed a state business registry entry. The address for the new company was identical to Tyler Fenn Construction. Same place? Exactly the same. Suite number and all. Josefina smiled grimly. He didn't even bother using a different mailbox service. And the registered agent is his cousin. But the paperwork was notarized by, let me guess, another questionable notary? Better. She slid a printed flight itinerary across the desk. The notary whose stamp appears on the new deed was in Scottsdale, Arizona, on the date she supposedly witnessed the signatures. I've already got his statement. I shook my head. They're getting sloppy. People who lie always do. Josefina gathered the papers into a folder. We need to depose Maurice. Today, if possible. The more they scramble, the more mistakes they'll make. My stomach tightened. She'll just deny everything. That's the point. Josefina tapped her pen against the desk. Under oath, with evidence in front of her, those denials become perjury. And I've subpoenaed her emails. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed with a text from Josefina. She's agreed. 3 p.m. today. Be here, but stay quiet. When I arrived back at the office that afternoon, Maurice was already seated in the conference room. Her hair was pulled back, highlighting the sharp angles of her face. She wore a navy dress that screamed professional innocence. Our eyes met briefly through the glass wall. She gave me a small, practiced smile like we were strangers at a dinner party. I took a seat against the wall behind Josefina, as instructed. The court reporter nodded to everyone, and the deposition began. "Mrs. Stewart," Josefina started, "please state your name for the record." "Maris Catherine Stewart." Her voice was butter smooth, rehearsed. "And you understand you're under oath today?" "Yes, of course." Josefina's questions started simple. Background, marriage history, knowledge of the cabin. Maurice answered each one with calm precision, occasionally glancing at her attorney. She portrayed herself as a concerned wife who'd tried to help manage finances while I was always working. The implication hung in the air. I was too busy to notice what was happening. "Did you communicate with Tyler Fenn about the sale of the Whitlow Lake property?" Josefina asked. "Only in passing. He handled the paperwork." Maurice's fingers tapped lightly against her water glass. "And the subsequent transfer to Lakefront Acquisitions, LLC?" Maurice straightened. "I had nothing to do with that transfer. I didn't even know about it until Mark started making accusations." "So you never discussed alternative arrangements if the initial sale was questioned?" "Absolutely not." Her tone hardened. "Mark's trying to make me look bad because he can't accept that we needed the money." Josefina nodded, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably before reaching into her folder. "I'd like to enter this as Exhibit C." She slid a printed email across the table. Maurice glanced down, her face drained of color. The email header showed her name, Tyler Fenn's address, and a subject line, "Re. Cabin Sale Docs." The text below was brief but damning. "Tyler, if he fights it, we'll just redo the forms like we discussed. Thanks for making this quick." "Would you like to amend your previous answer?" Josefina asked quietly. Maurice's attorney leaned over, whispering urgently. She ignored him. "This is taken completely out of context," Maurice snapped, pushing the paper away. "You can't just— This is private correspondence, which was obtained through legal discovery," Josefina reminded her. "Would you like to explain the context?" Maurice stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. "I'm done here. This is a witch hunt." Her attorney looked pained. "Mrs. Stewart, we haven't been dismissed." But she was already moving toward the door, grabbing her purse. "Call me when you want to be reasonable," she said over her shoulder. After she left, the room fell silent except for the court reporter's typing. "Well," Josefina said finally, "that'll look great in the transcript." That night, I was reviewing the deposition notes when my phone chimed with a bank alert. Joint checking account. Balance 0.00 RUD. Transaction description. Wire transfer. My hands shook slightly as I logged into the account. Maurice had emptied it. $17,000. Gone. I called the bank's emergency line, but it was too late. The transfer had been authorized by a joint account holder. Perfectly legal. 20 minutes later, a text arrived from a number I didn't recognize. "My attorney will contact you regarding custody arrangements for Mandy. Please direct all communication through counsel." The pieces clicked into place. She was using our savings to hire a custody lawyer. It wasn't enough to take my father's cabin. Now, she wanted my daughter too. I sat at my desk, illuminated by the glow of my laptop, reading the text over and over. The betrayal had found new depths. "If she wants war," I muttered, "she's got one." I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Maurice's face, not angry or sad, but that calculated blankness she wore when cornered. By morning, my eyes felt like they'd been rolled in sand. Mandy came downstairs in her favorite penguin pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. I forced a smile and poured her cereal, keeping my movements steady despite the storm inside me. "Why are you up so early, Dad?" she asked, spooning Cheerios into her mouth. "Just work stuff, honey," I said, ruffling her hair. "How'd you sleep?" "Good. I had a dream about the cabin. We were fishing with Grandpa." My chest tightened. "That sounds like a nice dream. When can we go back there? Her innocent question hung in the air. Soon, I promised, though I had no idea if it was true. Eat up. We need to get you to school. After dropping Mandy off, I drove straight to Josefina's office. Dark circles rimmed her eyes too, but her focus was laser-sharp as she spread documents across her desk. She emptied your account, Josefina said. Not a question. I nodded. And hired a custody lawyer. Classic escalation tactic. When the facts turn against them, they create new battlefronts. She slid a folder toward me. But we've been busy too. Inside were bank statements, not just mine, but records from an LLC called Lakeview Acquisitions, LLC. The statements showed a series of deposits from Maras to this company, starting 6 months before the cabin sale. Tyler Fenn is the sole owner of Lakeview, Josefina explained. Your wife wasn't just a victim of paperwork confusion. She was planning this for half a year. I remembered those months, Marie's taking weekend shopping trips, her sudden interest in our finances, the casual questions about the cabin's deed, all pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known I was supposed to solve. There's more, Josefina continued. The notary whose stamp appears on the second deed transfer? Angela Keene? She held up a printed flight itinerary. She was in Scottsdale, Arizona the entire week the document was supposedly signed in person. I let out a slow breath. So both signatures are forgeries. And provably so. Josefina gathered the papers. Their entire house of cards is collapsing, Mark. The judge will see this for what it is. Fraud. Plain and simple. That afternoon, we filed motions detailing each piece of evidence. I watched the court clerk timestamp them, making official what I'd known in my gut. My wife had betrayed me, lied about it, then tried to make me question my own memory. Remember when you hear those stories about people who stayed in bad situations too long? You wonder why they didn't see the sign. Sometimes the signs are invisible until you're drowning in them. I picked Mandy up from school, taking her for ice cream before heading home. She chatted about her day, oblivious to the legal warfare between her parents. I wanted to keep it that way for as long as possible. That night, as I tucked her into bed, she clutched her stuffed otter, a souvenir from the lake cabin gift shop. Dad? Her voice was small in the darkness. Mommy called today. She said I might come stay with her at a new place. My heart stuttered. Did she? She said you might be mad about it. Mandy's fingers twisted in her blanket. Are you and Mommy fighting about me? I sat on the edge of her bed, choosing my words carefully. No, honey, this isn't about you. Sometimes grown-ups disagree about important things, but that doesn't change how much we both love you. What about Grandpa's cabin? Will we still go there? I took her small hand in mine. I promise you, no one will take away our memories of Grandpa's cabin. No matter what happens, we'll still have those special times together. She nodded, seemingly satisfied, and hugged her otter closer. Grandpa would be mad at Mommy for being mean about his cabin. Out of the mouths of babes. Get some sleep, sweetheart. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The house was quiet, with only the distant hum of the refrigerator breaking the silence. I stood before the bathroom mirror, studying my reflection in the harsh light. The man staring back looked tired, but determined. No more letting her rewrite me, I whispered, straightening my tie before walking out to face the final trial. The courtroom was packed when we arrived. Neighbors, mechanics from my shop, even a reporter from the local paper squeezed into the wooden benches. I spotted Tyler Fenn first, hunched in a gray suit that looked fresh off the rack. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. 3 rows behind sat Maryse, wearing the navy dress she saved for parent-teacher conferences, the picture of respectability. Our eyes met briefly. She offered a small, confident smile that once would have reassured me. Today, it just looked hollow. All rise, the bailiff called as Judge Campbell entered, her silver-framed glasses catching the fluorescent light. I stood beside Josefina, feeling strangely calm. For weeks, I'd been chasing truth through a fog of lies. Now the fog was finally lifting. Josefina moved with precision as she presented our case. She'd arranged the evidence chronologically, building a timeline that left no room for misinterpretation. "Your Honor," she began, "the facts will demonstrate a calculated fraud perpetrated against my client, Mr. Stewart." She projected the first forged deed onto the courtroom screen, highlighting the signature that wasn't mine. Next came bank statements showing the suspicious transfers between Morris and Tyler's LLC months before the sale. "Note the pattern of payments," Josefina said, her voice steady. These weren't random transactions, but strategic investments in fraud. When she presented the notary's affidavit alongside flight records, proving she couldn't possibly have witnessed the signing, a murmur rippled through the courtroom. "And finally," Josefina said, "the shell company created for the second transfer, ostensibly to a third party, shares the exact mailing address as Mr. Fenn's primary business." Judge Campbell's pen paused over her notepad. "So you're alleging this second transfer was merely an attempt to circumvent the court's freeze order?" "Precisely, Your Honor." When Morris took the stand, her voice quavered with practiced emotion. "I believed everything was above board," she insisted. "Mark had mentioned selling the cabin before. I thought I was helping our financial situation." "Mrs. Stewart," Josefina countered, "can you explain this email to Mr. Fenn where you wrote, 'If he asks questions, deny everything'?" Marise's composure slipped. That's not what I meant. It's taken out of context." "What context would justify those instructions?" Marise had no answer. Her attorney tried objecting, but the damage was done. Tyler Fenn crumbled even faster when his turn came. His swagger disappeared under Josefina's questioning. "Did Mrs. Stewart tell you she had authority to sell the property?" Josefina asked. Tyler shifted in his seat. "She said it was joint property, that she just needed to handle it while he was away." "And the second transfer to your cousin's company?" He glanced at his attorney, who nodded slightly. That was her idea. She said we needed to move it quick before her husband caused problems." I watched Marise's face tighten as her co-conspirator abandoned their shared story. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Campbell reviewed her notes. When she looked up, her expression was granite. "The evidence presented today shows clear and convincing proof of fraud," she stated. "Both property transfers are hereby voided. Title is restored to Mark Stewart as the rightful owner." She paused, adjusting her glasses. "Additionally, I'm awarding damages of $40,000 plus attorney's fees to the plaintiff, to be paid jointly by Mrs. Stewart and Mr. Fenn." My chest tightened. We'd won. The cabin was mine again, had always been mine. All those nights wondering if I was crazy for fighting, and here was vindication in black and white. The divorce hearing that followed was brief by comparison. With the fraud judgment already established, the judge ruled quickly on the financial aspects. "The court finds willful financial misconduct on Mrs. Stewart's part," she declared. "Consequently, she forfeits any marital claim to the cabin property or its value." Afterward, in the courthouse hallway, I stood with Josefina reviewing paperwork when Marise approached. Her confidence had evaporated, leaving her looking smaller somehow. "Mark," she said softly, "it wasn't like that. I was trying to help us. You're blowing everything up." I faced her quietly. "You sold something sacred to me, and lied about it every step of the way. That's not help. It's harm." She opened her mouth, then closed it. For once, she had no more words, no more stories to spin. The truth had finally silenced her. I watched her walk away, shoulders hunched, before turning back to Josefina. "Thank you," I said simply, "for believing me." She smiled. "Facts don't lie, Mark. People do." I nodded, gathering my paper. Beyond the courthouse doors, sunlight cut through the glass in bright, clean rays. After weeks of storms, the sky had finally cleared. 6 weeks after the court ruling, I stood on the porch of the cabin, measuring boards for replacement. The spring air carried that familiar pine scent that always reminded me of Dad. I'd taken 2 weeks off from the shop to focus on repairs, time well spent erasing Tyler's damage. "Is this blue bright enough?" Mandy asked, holding up a paint-soaked brush. She'd begged to help with the restoration, claiming 8 was plenty old enough for important cabin work. "Perfect," I said, watching her carefully coat the railing. "Grandpa would have loved that color." I hammered the final board into place, completing the porch floor that Tyler had torn apart. Each nail felt like reclaiming something stolen. Not just wood, but memories. The cabin was coming back to life under our hands. By afternoon, we'd rehung the porch swing, the same one Dad and I had built 15 summers ago. I tightened the final bolt and gave it a gentle push, watching it sway. "Can we put Grandpa's special sign up now?" Mandy asked, setting down her paintbrush. I nodded, retrieving the small brass plaque from my toolbox. We'd chosen the words together, Mandy insisting it needed to be something important that reminds us. I held it against the main post while Mandy carefully marked the screw holes with a pencil. "Truth stands where lies fall," she read slowly, tracing each letter. "That means the good stuff wins in the end, right, Dad?" My throat tightened. "That's exactly what it means." We screwed the plaque into place, the brass gleaming against the weathered cedar. Something settled in my chest as I stepped back to look at it. Not victory, exactly, but resolution. That evening, we took Dad's old fishing rods down to the dock. The water lay flat and golden in the sunset, so different from the stormy weeks before. Mandy cast her line with serious concentration, determined to catch the biggest fish in the whole lake. I breathed deeply, letting the stillness work its way into me. This place had almost been erased from our lives, all the memories, all the quiet moments, traded for a quick deposit and a signature that wasn't mine. The following week, Josefina drove up to finalize the last of our paperwork. She whistled appreciatively at the repairs as I gave her a tour. "You've been busy," she said, running a hand along the fresh-painted railing. "Had a lot to fix," I replied, "inside and out." At the kitchen table, she laid out the final affidavit, confirming the property's clear title. I signed with my actual signature, the one Maurice had tried to forge. "That's it," Josefina said, tucking the paper into her briefcase. "It's officially, undeniably yours again." I handed her an envelope. "And this is officially, undeniably yours." She peeked inside at the check. Her final payment, plus a bonus. "Mark, this is too much." "Not for what you did," I said. "Not just the legal stuff. You believed me when I thought I was going crazy." 2 days later, I heard from Rob at the courthouse that Tyler had been charged with perjury for lying under oath about the second property transfer. The following week, local gossip confirmed what I'd suspected. Maurice had filed for bankruptcy, the legal fees and judgment having drained her accounts. Life found its rhythm again. Mornings at the shop, school pickup, homework at the kitchen table, weekends at the lake when weather permitted. No more looking over my shoulder, no more questioning my own memory. I ran into Maris at Mandy's school play that Saturday. She stood near the back of the auditorium, looking thinner, diminished somehow. The confident smile was gone. When our eyes met, I simply nodded politely and turned away. Whatever anger I'd carried had burned itself out, leaving behind something cooler and cleaner. That night, Mandy and I sat on the newly rebuilt porch under a blanket of stars. The lake glimmered with moonlight, peaceful and permanent. "Dad," Mandy asked sleepily, "are you still sad about Mom?" I considered this carefully. Not sad exactly, just wiser. "What does that mean?" "It means I learned something important." I gazed across the silver-tipped water. "She tried to sell peace, but peace isn't for sale." Mandy laughed suddenly, the sound carrying across the water, bright and true. That should be our next sign. I smiled, watching the moonlight dance across the lake. This was home now. Not revenge, not victory, but truth, simple and enduring, like the cabin itself. I believe stories such as this find us for a reason. If this one touches you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day. In the meantime, there are 2 stories on the screen that are even better.